of the people who have Donald Trump's ear.
Olivia Rinaldi in West Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you so very much. That does it for today. We will be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson, that starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for July 10th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. President Biden plays NATO host for a second day as world leaders hear Ukraine's President Zelensky's urgent plea. In his own party, the president faces more roiling. Some in Congress say we've got your back. Others want to see Biden's back. And now George Clooney has weighed in on the president's competence. Overseas, Israel warns residents of Gaza that more attacks are coming. And a story that gets lost in all the stories is the crisis in Sudan. We'll talk to the UN ambassador about the humanitarian disaster in the African nation and what can be done to address it. We'll check in with our Bill Harwood on the status of those Boeing astronauts. They're still up there in space. And we'll explore a new study from down here on Earth about the epidemic of loneliness. And finally, I'm coming to you from an urban heat island, a simmering asphalt slab melting city dwellers more than their rural kin. We'll explain that phenomenon. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with President Biden and the threats that define his tenure. In February 2021, 1 month into his presidency, Biden said the world was at an inflection point between democracy and the rise of autocracy. 3.5 years later, that sentiment remains a cornerstone of his global posture. On Wednesday, President Biden kicked off day 2 of the NATO 75th anniversary summit in Washington. The military alliance is telling Russia and any other autocrats like China who might be watching that the war in Ukraine cannot continue. But amid lingering doubts about his fitness to carry out another 4 years in office, the commander-in-chief is also using NATO as a selling point for a second term.
Since I took office, we've doubled the number of battle groups in NATO's eastern flank, and the United States has. Finland and Sweden have joined the alliance, and the number of allies spending at least 2% on defense has gone from 9 to 23. That's not happened by chance, but by choice.
President Biden will host NATO leaders for a reception at the White House Wednesday evening. On Thursday, senior campaign advisors will head to Capitol Hill to meet with Senate Democrats about the path forward for Biden's candidacy against NATO critic Donald Trump. But the politics of the moment mean little to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has fought against Russian forces for nearly 2.5 years. He said Tuesday the fate of his country cannot hinge on one election.
Now everyone is waiting for November. And truly speaking, Putin awaits November 2. It's time to step out of the shadows, to make strong decisions work, to act and not to wait for November or any other month.
Let's bring in Max Bergman. He's the director of the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Max, thanks for being with us. It's good to have you again. Help us understand what questions NATO, what are the questions in front of NATO that are up for grabs, and how much sway does President Biden have in determining the course or the answers to those questions?
Well, I think a lot of the questions, John, have been addressed, have been discussed for a while, going back since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And this summit, in some ways, is a fairly technocratic summit. NATO laid out a new strategy 2 years ago. Last year, they determined these sort of regional plans, how they would defend against a Russian attack. And this year is sort of checking to make sure that folks are implementing these plans. And it seems that NATO is really on the right course. When it comes to Ukraine, the key is continued military support for Ukraine. We have to remember that Ukraine is still surviving. It exists. I think there was a few months ago, there was real concern about where Ukraine would be at the time of the summit, whether it was going to be on the back foot with Russia really making real gains on the ground. But U.S. aid is flowing. Ukraine is holding the lines, and Ukrainian democracy is surviving, is in strong shape. So in many ways, there's a lot going right with the alliance, and this was in some ways a summit to reflect on what was going right with the NATO alliance.
In a joint statement of NATO leaders, they said Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, but didn't say how soon that would happen. How strong of a statement is that? Is that something that has to be said because Ukraine's in the middle of a fight with Russia? Help us understand that comment.
Yeah, so there was a lot of discussion, especially at the last year's summit, about whether Ukraine will get an invitation to join NATO. The Biden administration and as well as other NATO countries decided now is not the right time for an invitation. Ukraine is obviously at war with Russia, and so bringing Ukraine in might mean war with Russia. And the Biden administration has made very clear that it is not going to send U.S. forces to defend Ukraine. And so what you then have is a lot of diplomatic efforts to really show strong words and commitment to Ukraine in this communique that is really poured over by nerds like me. But in reality, I think that the key thing that really matters is the other announcements about air defense support, about continuing military support for Ukraine in providing assistance. And so irreversible, I think, shows that Ukraine is on track to join the West, to join the European Union and NATO. And I think it's an important signal, not just to Moscow, but I think to the rest of the world as well.
Max, President Zelensky mentioned November. Let me just stop the question there. How much does that hang over this meeting, and what are the ramifications about how the U.S. elections turn out?
Well, it hangs over. It really does hang over the meeting. The Europeans are obsessed with American politics because their security in some ways depends on the election. There's been a lot of focus on the president's performance at the debate roughly 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago. But NATO came up continuously throughout the debate in ways that wouldn't be reassuring to Europeans, particularly when it comes to Donald Trump's skepticism. And the reason why Europe is so concerned is that this is not just about spending money. Europe could spend a lot more money and would still be fully dependent on the United States because that's the way the United States has wanted Europe to be. The U.S. has wanted to call the shots in NATO, and we do. And that gives us incredible influence, gives us this really strong allies, but it also means that the U.S. pulls back, Europe can't simply fill the gap. The U.S. is the quarterback of this team, and it's a real problem if you don't have a quarterback.
And super quick, Max, the NATO leaders also called China a quote-unquote decisive enabler of Russia. Is that just rhetoric, or is there something particular we should pay attention to there?
No, I think that's quite significant, John, because, look, Washington can say whatever it wants about China, and it won't change any behavior in Beijing. But China is really also dependent on the European market. It wants to have good relations with Europe. And from the Washington perspective, getting Europe to call out China and China's support for Russia has been really important. And we think that might change Chinese behavior. Maybe not significantly, but maybe at the margins. And I think it's a strong statement to China that its support for the Russian defense industry is endangering European security, and Europeans are going to take note and take names. And I think that's an important signal to send.
Max Bergman with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Very helpful, Max. Thank you.
Thanks.
1 month ago, George Clooney was a featured star at a blockbuster fundraising event for Joe Biden. Now he's calling for him to exit the race. In an op-ed in the New York Times Wednesday, the Oscar-winning actor and director writes, "The party needs a new nominee in order to save democracy." Referring to the fundraising event, Clooney said the president, quote, wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate. Also on Wednesday, Congressman Pat Ryan of New York became the 8th Democratic lawmaker to publicly say Biden needs to step aside. And Michael Bennet of Colorado became the first Democratic senator to question Biden's candidacy, saying he could lose to Donald Trump in a, quote, landslide. This all comes as former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi appeared to suggest on MSNBC the president should reconsider his decision to stay in the race.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think, overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore. But he's beloved. He is respected. And people want him to make that decision, not me.
Pelosi later told CBS News that her comments were misrepresented and that she fully supports whatever the president chooses to do. And here to weigh in on all of this is Susan Page. She's the Washington bureau chief at USA Today. Susan, thank you so much. I find myself again seeking your interpretation of the House Speaker Emeritus, Nancy Pelosi. She seemed to suggest that Biden still has a decision to make that he says is no decision at all because he's staying in the race. There's nothing to decide.
Yeah. So her cleanup did not vary from her original statement, which was to basically reject Biden's declaration over and over again that he's not going anywhere. So this is I think subtle, but Nancy Pelosi, as you know, is a woman of great deliberation. She does not speak off the cuff. She does not typically make errors in talking to reporters. She knew what she was doing this morning. She was opening the door to Biden, saying there is still concern. We are not yet persuaded.
Yes, I know that very well as someone who's tried desperately to get her to speak off the cuff and failed. We mentioned 8 Democratic House lawmakers have called on Biden to exit the race. Minority Leader Jeffries is confirmed that he plans to convey the concerns of the caucus by Friday. Senate Democrats are going to meet with Biden folks in a caucus lunch on Thursday. What's your assessment of kind of where things stand with the chatter on the Hill, which is in a roar now that they're all back in town?
Yeah, rarely have we seen a bigger difference between what members of Congress are saying in public and what they are saying in private. You only have 8 members coming out and saying he should step down. You have a few more saying we're concerned about him. If you talk to them behind the scenes when their names are not being associated with their remarks, that concern, that feeling that Biden really should step back, as messy and unprecedented as that would be, is pretty wide. The level of concern among Democrats, not only that they're going to lose the White House to Donald Trump, but that they're going to lose control of the Senate and that they will not regain control of the House. It will be a catastrophic election year for Democrats with Biden at the top of the ticket. That is the view of a significant number of Democratic office holders.
And then finally, Susan, I just want to ask you about this, the George Clooney thing. So now Michael Douglas, who also held a fundraiser for Biden, is saying that the president is not fit. They would be examples of the elites that Biden has spent the beginning of this week criticizing. But isn't one of many of the fixes that the president is in here is that he needs those elites to raise lots and lots of money for him and the party? How do you see that tension? Yeah.
I mean, if you've lost George Clooney, how do you even move ahead? But, it's true. He's not an office holder. He's never run for office. He's a celebrity. That said, he hosted the biggest fundraising event in Democratic history for Biden just recently. And the most damaging thing, I think, could create a money crunch for Biden. But you read his op-ed in the New York Times, and he says that what he saw up close with Biden at the fundraiser was the Joe Biden we saw at the debate. And that is very worrisome because one of the things that's making Democrats unwilling to accept Biden's decision to stay on the ticket is that they continue to read stories and hear accounts about him being in fragile health behind the scenes as well as at that disastrous debate.
Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you, John.
The remnants of Hurricane Beryl are moving upstate through the Midwest and Northeast. The weather system was downgraded from a tropical storm to a tropical depression Monday evening after making landfall as a Category 1 hurricane in Texas. The Lone Star State is now facing more than 1 million power outages as it battles extreme heat. The problem is especially prominent in Houston, the nation's 4th largest city. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca is there with the latest. Omar?
Here we are a few days after Hurricane Beryl, and the big question is, when is power going to be restored to the people who lost it here in Southeast Texas and the Houston area? Here's some of the numbers. As of right now, at last check, 1.2 million CenterPoint Energy customers are without power. The number restored so far, 985,000. And it's interesting to note is that CenterPoint promised the mayor of Houston that they would restore power to 1 million people by 10 p.m. local time here. We'll see if that happens. Centerpoint said that they are on track to meet that goal. But in the meantime, in the heat of the day, with heat indexes in triple digits, people have to come to places like this. This is a cooling center. You can see behind me. It's people just sitting at tables, relaxing. There's places for kids to play, because mind you, when there's no power, even daycares and stuff like that where kids would be at, or camps, they are closed because there's no AC. This is a vital part of the community to make sure that this issue doesn't turn into a medical issue at all. So there's food and water here for the people, places for them to charge their phone. A lot of people are trying to log on and see the Centerpoint Energy outage map. Well, that outage map has not been online since May from an earlier storm. People were checking the Whataburger burger app to see if the Whataburger near them had power. Maybe they would have power at home. But instead, Centerpoint has a restoration map that they put up today after a lot of pressure from people in the community here. We're going to continue to monitor how quick they get power on, but that's a big issue here in Houston with all the humidity and triple-digit heat index. John?
Omar Villafranca, thank you very much, Omar. Still to come, Sudan is facing a severe hunger and humanitarian crisis more than a year into a bloody civil war. I'll speak with the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations about her efforts in the country and why she thinks the U.S. can make a difference. Plus, we'll take a look at how loneliness can lead to serious health concerns and ask an expert how to combat it. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
A new survey out Wednesday shows that while it may be a small world after all, a lot of us feel alone in it. According to Gallup, 23% of people surveyed globally said they felt significant loneliness the previous day. That's more than 1 in 5. A separate Gallup study finds that loneliness can come with other negative feelings, such as physical pain, worry, sadness, stress, and anger. Megan Hayes joins us now. She's an associate professor and clinical psychologist at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Thank you so much for joining us. Are there certain areas or groups experiencing this sense of loneliness more than other groups?
Yes, so I think it's important to point out that loneliness is pervasive right now across all age groups. But one thing that we're finding is that younger adults and adolescents are actually showing the highest levels of loneliness, whereas we used to think of loneliness as being more of something that older adults dealt with. And what we're really finding is that it's more of a U-shaped curve with age, where we have the youngest folks tending to be the most lonely, as well as the oldest in our country.
And let's stay with the young folks, more connected than ever with their digital devices and all of that. But just because you're with a lot of people online doesn't mean you don't feel alone. Help us understand that.
I know it sounds so counterintuitive, right? The people who have their phones in their hands all the time and constantly on social media are the ones who are potentially the most lonely. And I think it really just points out the fact that you cannot replace, these screens. They cannot replace a face-to-face interaction. So while on social media, you might have a lot of followers or people commenting or liking on your stuff, these connections may not be deep and meaningful relationships. And those are the types of connections that we really need in order to combat loneliness.
How big a role, if it played any role at all, did the pandemic play in this problem? Are we still seeing the ripple effects, or is there another part of this or is there another factor causing this?
Yeah, I will say even long before the pandemic, people were paying attention to this. Psychologists certainly were, sociologists, public health authorities, and already, we were reaching levels that, were a level of an advisory. But the pandemic certainly worsened things. They exacerbated the crisis and really pushed it into a full-blown epidemic level.
So let's, at the end here, talk about what ways to combat this. First of all, let's just at the individual level. Are there remedies, ways for people who are feeling lonely or know somebody who is to remedy this?
Yes, there's actually a lot that we can do at the individual level to help our situations or to help others who are lonely. One thing is simply to take the initiative. So a lot of people think that, they may be afraid to reach out to another person, or they might not want to hear from them. But actually, old friends, research shows, tend to be happier than we think when we reach out to them. Same with family members. So reaching out to old friends can be really helpful. They tend to be happy about that. We can also join groups. So research has shown that we tend to have fewer group opportunities. We tend to do less in our communities these days. So if we can join groups and show up consistently to those groups, then that can be really helpful, because the more that we're around people, the more they start to like us, right? And that's something called the mirror exposure effect. Another thing that we can do is that we can just simply assume that people like us. So a lot of people make the wrong assumption that people don't like them after a social interaction. That's a phenomenon called the liking gap. And the reality is that people like us a lot more than we think most of the time. So simply assuming that people like us will make us warmer, friendlier, more approachable. So those are just a few things that can help.
Well, those are great. Megan Hayes, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says it's unlikely interest rates will ever return to the super low levels seen between 2008, the financial crisis of 2008, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Powell made those comments Wednesday during a second day of testimony on the Hill, this time before the House Financial Services Committee. While Powell noted that the central bank has made considerable progress in the fight against inflation with 11 interest rate hikes, they aren't going back to the near zero territory held for most of the 15 years before the pandemic.
We probably won't go back to that era between the global financial crisis and the pandemic, where rates were very, very low and inflation was very low. We think that things like the neutral rate are driven by slow-moving forces, but ultimately you can see the effect. We have, our policy rate is over 5% now. And it feels like policy is restrictive, but not, intensely restrictive. So that suggests that the neutral rate of interest, at least as of now, will have risen somewhat, which means rates will be a little higher.
And just to explain that in English, he's saying even when we're out of the woods, there's no going back. Due to changes in the economy, future interest rates will be higher than before the pandemic, when they were between 1.5 to 1.75 5%. And even those future rates, though, come down, they won't be as high as they are currently, which is between 5.25% to 5.5%. During the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about the Great Resignation, really more accurately, a great reshuffling, when millions of Americans quit their jobs for new ones. Now, some economists are combining their desire to name workplace trends with size-related adjectives and identifying something they call the big stay. According to April data from the consulting firm Robert Half, which was first reported by the Wall Street Journal, 77% of workers said they are happy with their jobs. 85% said they had a good work-life balance. Only 35% said they are planning to look for another job, a drop from 49% a year ago. Big pay hikes that encouraged people to switch jobs, a key trend that drove the Great Resignation, those are also falling. According to the Atlanta Federal Reserve's wage tracker, people who are switching jobs got a median pay bump of 5.2% as of March. That's not much more than the pay bump, though, that went to those who just stayed put. People who stayed put got a 4.5% raise. Now, back in July of 2022, job switchers got a median bump of 8.5%. Drug lord Pablo Escobar has been dead for years, but his legacy lives on. In the 1980s, Escobar spent his drug profits on a collection of wild animals for his estate in Colombia. Among the smuggled animals were 4 hippos. Police caught up and killed Escobar in 1993. By 1998, the government seized possession of his property and sent most of the animals, elephants, giraffes, to zoos. However, Escobar's hippos were considered too dangerous to move and soon started breeding. By 2023, there were an estimated 169 hippos in Colombia's Magdalena Basin. Biologists say that number could rise to 1,400 by 2024 if nothing is done. Experts say the animals can disrupt and displace other mammals, and they have also attacked and scared people and hurt crops. Conservationists are now running a program to sterilize hippos in the wild. So far, they have castrated 7. Experts say 33 more are needed to control the population. Coming up, the involuntary manslaughter trial for Alec Baldwin is now underway. What was said during witness testimony, nearly 3 years after the fatal shooting on set. You're streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes. Did you ever have these problems before the derailment? No, ma'am. This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we
unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be.
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. On day 2 of the NATO summit, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Wednesday with the new UK Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who was ushered into office after the Labour Party landslide. The pair acknowledged the special relationship between the U.S. and UK. Blinken stressed the importance of coordinating when dealing with issues such as Russia and the Middle East. Also on the sidelines of the NATO summit, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with lawmakers Wednesday, presenting both Senate leaders with tokens of Ukraine. He also spoke with House Speaker Mike Johnson. Zelensky is in Washington to push for more global aid as Russia continues its invasion. Israel will start sending draft notices over the next few weeks to some ultra-Orthodox Jews who were previously exempt from military service. It follows a Supreme Court ruling last month against the policy. The Israeli defense minister says not everyone who received notices will end up serving. In the 15 months since a violent civil war in Sudan broke out, the country has fallen into the worst hunger crisis ever recorded in the African nation. More than 10 million people have been forced out of their homes. 25.6 million people, more than half of the country's population, are facing some sort of hunger crisis. The number of people facing a hunger emergency, just a step below famine, has gone up 74% since the start of 2024. The UN says $2.7 billion in funding is needed to help the people of Sudan. As of 2 weeks ago, it's only received 18% of that. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, joins me now. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. Let me start to frame the conversation this way. Earlier this year, I spoke with Cameron Hudson from CSIS about the humanitarian crisis in Sudan, and he gave 2 main reasons for why there has been neglect in the world. He said one is that there's just too much going on the globe, from Ukraine to Israel to China to Russia, that the world can only handle so many crises at a time. And the second thing was that Sudan has had a longstanding problem in crisis in one form or another since its formation in the 50s. Do you agree with that way of framing this idea that the world has ignored this topic?
No, I know Cameron well, and I actually don't agree with that frame. I think when there are crises in the world, we have to pay attention. That's the reason you and I are talking about Sudan today. It's the reason I took a press team into Chad on the border with Sudan last year. It's the reason we're regularly engaging on Sudan and actively engaged on trying to find a political solution to end this horrific war and work to bring humanitarian assistance to the people of Sudan. There are meetings taking place right now, John, in Geneva, being led by the Secretary General's personal envoy, working with our special envoy, Tom Perriello, to bring the parties together to talk about how to address the humanitarian situation, how to get assistance to those in need, and how to find a political solution to bring the 2 parties together. The U.S. is the largest contributor to humanitarian assistance in Sudan, and we're working to get more assistance to address the appeal that the Secretary General referenced. More needs to be done, but we're not ignoring it.
Ambassador, tell me what you saw on that visit. Help people understand what's happening. These numbers can sometimes get abstract.
You know, what I saw, and there were a lot of press reports that came out of that visit, was despair. I saw families coming in on donkey carts from across the border. I spoke to women who had been raped And as I have quoted many times, one telling me she'd completely lost her ambition. I went into a hospital where there was an eerie silence with dozens of children laying in the bed, looking listless from starvation. And I saw so many families who just had this sense of hopelessness and despair as they fled their homes being attacked by the RSF.
I mean, one of the challenges always with aid is that you can give the money, but then the question is, are there systems in place to get it to the people who need it? Even if there were a ceasefire, is it possible to get, are there systems in place to get the aid to the most needed areas?
You know, there are. We have some amazing humanitarian organizations, from World Food Program and UNICEF to international NGOs, who are, even as the fighting continue, working to get food to people in need. If the fighting ends, they are ready and they are prepared to move forward. And it just requires these two generals to stop fighting each other and allow for assistance to get in. Just look at the Chadian border at Adre. That border has been closed by the SAF. There are agencies sitting on the Chadian side of the border waiting to go in. And so, yes, if there's a ceasefire, and there's a push right now for a ceasefire in Al-Fasher, if there's a ceasefire, I am absolutely confident that the agencies are ready to move in with resources.
Ambassador, help Americans understand the role of their nation in these kinds of instances and why there's an American interest in a place like Sudan.
You know, I like that question because what I always say about Americans is that Americans care. We actually do care about what is happening in other places around the world. We don't want to see people suffering. We don't want to see people starving. And this is a situation where we can actually make a difference. American largesse, American support, American leadership can actually make a difference in Sudan. And it can lead to the saving of lives. The other part of this is I have seen the results of our engagement. I met just recently a young Sudanese woman who was in a refugee camp in Kenya when she was 8 years old. She is now an American citizen. She's living in the United States. She's well educated. She's really an example of what can happen if a young person is given opportunity. And she got the opportunity through the U.S. resettlement program to come to the United States and actually pursue her ambitions, unlike the young woman who I met in Chad, who told me she'd lost her ambition.
UN Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, John.
The $230 million pier meant to deliver aid to Palestinians may become a bridge to nowhere. The pier has faced major logistical challenges from the start, largely from bad weather and rough seas. It may now go offline forever. Meanwhile, an Israeli airstrike killed dozens of in southern Gaza Tuesday. CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams has more from Tel Aviv. Holly?
Good evening, John. An Israeli airstrike last night on a school sheltering displaced Palestinians in southern Gaza killed at least 25 people. That's according to an Associated Press reporter who counted the bodies. A hospital official told CBS News the death toll later increased to 29, and we understand that includes several children. In a statement, Israel's military said it used a, quote, precise munition to kill a militant who took part in the October 7th attacks and is reviewing the incident. With a new assault in Gaza City in the northern Gaza Strip, Israel's military has called for yet another mass evacuation of Palestinians. The United Nations called the latest exodus dangerously chaotic, with doctors and nurses at 2 hospitals rushing to move their patients out of harm's way. Now, Israel's military says medical facilities do not need to move, but its raids at other hospitals have left medical staff fearful. Hamas said the new assault could, quote, reset the negotiation process to square one. Meanwhile, the pier built by the US military in Gaza to bring in humanitarian aid, which has been plagued by bad weather, will likely be re-established this week, but could then be permanently dismantled, according to US officials. John.
Holly Williams, thank you. 2 Senate Democrats are asking the Justice Department to investigate Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas for potential violations of tax and ethics laws. Thomas first came under scrutiny in April of 2023 when a report by ProPublica detailed hundreds of thousands of dollars in lavish vacations he went on with Republican megadonor Harlan Crow. The justice also received other expensive gifts that he failed to disclose. The Justice Department has not responded to the request for a special counsel investigation. Witness testimony began Wednesday in Alec Baldwin's criminal trial in New Mexico. The actor is charged with involuntary manslaughter for the 2021 death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins while on the set of the film Rust. During opening statements, the prosecution accused Baldwin of reckless disregard in the fatal shooting. Baldwin's defense team said he had no reason to think the gun had live ammunition.
The evidence will show that someone who played make-believe with a real gun and violated the cardinal rules of firearm safety is the defendant, Alexander Baldwin.
The prop gun was placed in Mr. Baldwin's hands and cold gun was announced, meaning it had been checked and double-checked by those responsible to ensure the gun was safe. It was just a prop. They all thought it was just a prop and could do no harm.
4 people have testified so far, including a former lieutenant who said there were no rounds in the gun when he secured it after the shooting. Body camera footage was played in court. 16 jurors will hear the case over the coming weeks and decide whether to convict the 66-year-old. Baldwin faces up to 18 months in prison if convicted. When we come back, we'll get an update on the 2 Starliner astronauts in space, why they're still in orbit, and the timeline for when they could come back to Earth. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded 1-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The two astronauts who traveled to the International Space Station aboard Boeing's Starliner spacecraft say they're confident it can return them to Earth. Test pilots Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams blasted off into space last month and have been aboard the ISS ever since. The launch was marred by leaks and thruster failures, and further technical issues have kept them in space longer than scheduled. The trip was meant to last 8 days, and it's now day 35. In a press conference from orbit, the duo said they could return once thruster testing is completed.
We're going to learn from that, and we're going to incorporate new processes, new procedures that we will employ if necessary. So obviously, right now, we are ready. We will be ready then, unless the data shows otherwise. But right now, based on what we know, we are absolutely ready.
CBS News space consultant Bill Harwood joins us now from Florida. Bill, it's great to be with you again. Tell us, what do we know about thruster testing?
Well, you know, they've got a thruster that's identical to the ones on board the Starliner. They've got it at a NASA test facility at White Sands, New Mexico. And what they're trying to do, John, is they're trying to duplicate the environmental conditions and, you know, the temperatures and pressures and things that the thrusters in space are experiencing when those failures occurred. Now, they occurred, you know, during final approach to the space station. They were facing the sun, so there had some heat coming there. And they were the computer was repetitively firing these thrusters literally hundreds of times on that final approach. So they're trying to see if the solar orientation, the rapidity of these jet firings contributed to this. And if they can replicate the problem, then they know how to handle it down the road. They can fire the jets in a different way with the spacecraft, perhaps slightly different orientation, and that problem goes away. But they're trying to figure that out right now as we speak.
So, Bill, I know nothing. That sounds like a complicated problem. I mean, is this a problem that's kind of like, well, this is regular business, or this is something that's a significant safety concern?
You know, you have to keep in mind that this is the first piloted flight of the Starliner. They've never had it up with people during a full-up mission. And so they're really kind of trying to wring it out. They think the thrusters will actually work fine. They hot-fired those thrusters that failed later in the flight after it was docked to the space station. They all worked fine, except for one that apparently has actually failed. But most of the thrusters are working just fine, and they think the crew would be perfectly safe to undock and come home tomorrow. But, you know, what you have to remember is that all these thrusters and those helium leaks you referenced, they're located in a thing called the service module that's right below the Starliner crew capsule. And before they re-enter the atmosphere, they detach that, and that burns up in the atmosphere. They don't get it back. So they're never going to get a chance to put their hands on the hardware to look at exactly what happened. So they're taking as much time as they can right now to run these tests on the ground as well as test in space to try to wring this out once and for all.
Oh, well, that's incredibly interesting. Okay, so my last question then, Bill, is do they have the space and equipment and supplies and everything for astronauts to spend this kind of extra time up there? And might they be able to hitch another ride home if something happened with the Starliner? I mean, there are other ways to get home, right?
Well, two answers to your question. First of all, there's plenty of supplies on board the International Space Station. They keep the food, the clothing, all of those sorts of things stocked up on the lab just in case something like this happens. So plenty of margin there, no issue. Now, you're right. They could, in theory, bring the two crew members home on a SpaceX Crew Dragon. It would take a lot of replanning. It'd be a big deal if they did that. And it would mean they concluded that the Starliner wasn't safe to come home in. They haven't done that yet. The Starliner is certified, like I said, to leave right now if there's an emergency on the space station. So nobody expects that to happen. But in a worst case, depending on how the testing goes, that option is always in their back pocket.
Bill Harwood. Bill, always such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
This summer's heat wave has shattered temperature records across the country, but those living in so-called urban heat islands are feeling the heat even more. A new study by Climate Central found that 34 million people nationwide are living in cities where their environment makes it feel at least 8 degrees hotter than the actual temperature. So as you stroll along in what the weatherman told you was 90-degree heat, with the urban heat island effect, it would feel like at least 98 degrees. The effect is driven by several core characteristics of cities. First, there's the amount of plants in an urban environment. One of the best ways to counteract the urban heat island effect is to plant more trees, which can help absorb the excessive sunlight. Having more vegetation can help reduce peak summer temperatures up to 9%. But if those plants aren't there, it gets hot. The second reason is the concrete jungle absorbs sunlight and radiates back as heat. Finally, all the people who live in those heat-reflective buildings create extra energy. For example, during heat waves, air conditioners contribute 87% of total heat waste that's transferred outside. That's according to the Department of Energy. The urban heat island effect affects some of America's largest cities, but also some other places you might not expect. In 12 cities, New York City, Fort Myers, West Palm Beach, Detroit, San Antonio, Norfolk, Tampa, Spokane, Tulsa, Dayton, and Dallas, more than 80% of the population experiences this effect. For those living in New York City, the city from which I am melting to you at this very moment, New Yorkers have the worst average increase in temperature of 9.7 degrees. These high temperatures can create health risks. According to the National Weather Service, more deaths were attributed to heat waves last year than any other type of natural disaster like floods or tornadoes. And heat stroke, one of the deadliest illnesses caused by high temperatures, can happen in just a few minutes. So to come, royal fans will soon be able to stand inside an iconic room in Buckingham Palace. But if you're hoping to claim your spot, good luck. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
but with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Tickets to see Buckingham Palace's famed East Wing have already sold out ahead of next week's exclusive tours. For the first time, visitors who secured the roughly $90 ticket will get to see the iconic balcony where the royal family often stands during major events, but they will not be able to actually stand on the balcony itself. The balcony was commissioned by Prince Albert during his wife Queen Victoria's reign. The previously private wing was built in 1847 to accommodate the couple's 9 children and menagerie of animals. Tours begin July 15th and will run through August 31st. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. President Biden battles some Democrats' doubts about his candidacy as world leaders gather for the NATO summit. Takeaways and analysis from day 2 of the meeting. Plus, crews race to restore power in the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl. A look at the recovery efforts underway amid sweltering temperatures. And if you're feeling lonely, you are not alone. A psychologist joins us to weigh in on what new data tells us about widespread loneliness. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this.
What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
This really
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
What does that mean in
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here. We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way. We'll take you places. We teach you new things. And we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I'm John Dickerson. Join me for the Daily Report, weekdays on CBS News 24/7.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going. The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
Welcome to the Daily Report for July 10th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. President Biden plays NATO host for a second day as world leaders hear Ukraine's President Zelensky's urgent plea. In his own party, the president faces more